I opened the door that evening to find the living room already crowded, voices laughing and mingling in a way that made my chest tighten. My son stood in the center, a proud smile on his face, and behind him were half a dozen people I didn't know, shoes scattered at the entrance, jackets hanging over chairs, and an energy that made my carefully quiet evening vanish in an instant. I swallowed, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "Oh, I didn't realize you were having people over," I said, my voice steadier than my racing heart. He looked at me, confused for a moment, before shrugging as if it were no big deal. "Mom, I thought it would be fun," he said casually, like inviting strangers into our home was just part of life. Fun. The word echoed in my mind as I glanced around. The kitchen table was set for two. The food I had carefully planned, simple and quiet, was for our evening alone. My thoughts tumbled as I realized that nothing in the house, nothing on the counter, nothing in the fridge, matched the energy now filling the room. I could see my son's friends making themselves comfortable, chatting freely, drinking juice I hadn't prepared for guests, and laughing as if they owned the space. I took a deep breath and stepped into the living room, putting on the calmest smile I could manage. "Well," I said lightly, "looks like we'll have to make do with what we have." My son's friends glanced at me, unsure whether to help or just continue enjoying themselves. Some offered nervous greetings. I nodded politely, though inside, I felt a surge of panic. How would I feed them? Where would I find enough plates, enough snacks? Everything I had carefully thought out for the evening had evaporated. I excused myself to the kitchen, trying to think quickly. I opened the fridge and pulled out the ingredients I had set aside for our quiet dinner. My mind raced, and then an idea struck. If I couldn't serve what I planned, I could create something different. Something everyone could enjoy without panic, without embarrassment. I pulled out vegetables, eggs, and the loaf of bread I had baked earlier. I thought fast, chopping and mixing, improvising a meal I hadn't intended to make but that could stretch to feed the unexpected guests. Meanwhile, the laughter from the living room grew louder. My son appeared in the doorway, still smiling, clearly pleased with himself. "Mom," he said, "don't worry. They'll love whatever you make." He sounded confident, even teasing. But I could see the subtle undercurrent. He hadn't prepared me for this. He hadn't considered the disruption, the effort, the mental scramble that went into hosting. He had assumed I would just adjust, just go along with it. I put on a determined expression and focused on the task at hand. As I stirred and mixed, I imagined how I could turn this unexpected situation into something positive. If I acted quickly, creatively, maybe I could even impress them, show them that an unplanned evening didn't have to feel awkward or chaotic. I started pulling together a simple, comforting dish, an egg and vegetable bake, lightly spiced, filling, and warm. I arranged slices of the fresh bread on a tray and found a small salad tucked in the fridge, crisp and refreshing. By the time I returned to the living room, the table looked different. Not what I had originally planned, not elaborate, but inviting in its own way. The guests were curious, leaning in to see what I had created. I smiled, offering them plates, trying to hide the racing thoughts in my head. "I hope you'll enjoy this," I said softly, and the first bites were met with surprise, smiles, and murmurs of approval. My son watched, eyes wide with a mixture of pride and mild astonishment. "Mom," he said quietly, almost apologetically, "you really did this." On the spot, I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Sometimes plans change," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "And that's okay. We make do." As the evening unfolded, I noticed something remarkable. The laughter continued, the conversation flowed, and though the night had begun with tension and surprise, it transformed into something warm and shared. My improvised meal became a talking point, a bridge between unexpected chaos and connection. And as I watched my son interact with his friends, seeing the joy and ease that filled the room, I realized that this small, unplanned disruption had become an opportunity to teach patience, adaptability, and even the quiet magic of turning an unexpected challenge into something memorable. By the time the last guest left, late in the evening, my son helped me clear the table. "Mom," he said softly, "thanks for, dealing with all that. I didn't think about how much work it would be." I smiled, tired but content. "It's all right. Next time, maybe we'll plan together." He grinned, nodding, and for the first time, I felt the subtle shift, the understanding that while spontaneity and fun were part of life, There was also a respect for the effort and care behind every plan. And somehow, in that balance, I knew our evening had become something more than just an unplanned visit. It had become a quiet lesson, a gentle reminder, and a memory that would linger far longer than the simple dishes I had prepared on a whim. The days that followed that unexpected evening carried a new rhythm in our household, though it was one that had been quietly building long before the surprise guests arrived. My son had always been energetic, enthusiastic, and sometimes impulsive, but living through that evening had subtly shifted the dynamic between us. I noticed small changes in him, in his approach to planning, in the way he considered consequences before acting. And I realized that if I wanted to guide him, if I wanted him to truly understand responsibility and patience, I needed to build a foundation that went far beyond one improvised dinner. Our daily life had never been particularly easy. We weren't wealthy, nor did we live extravagantly, but we had enough to get by. Yet, every day involved balancing the small things: bills, groceries, school fees, chores, and quiet attempts to stretch every resource further than it seemed possible. I had learned over the years to move with patience and precision. Each decision was measured, each purchase weighed carefully, each small success savored quietly. I spent my mornings preparing our home for the day. Breakfasts were simple, but nourishing. I made sure there was always something warm on the table to start the day right. I watched my son wake and go about his morning routine, noticing habits that revealed both his strengths and the areas where he needed guidance. He had a kind heart, an eagerness to help, but he could be impulsive, careless with time and details, and sometimes overly confident in situations where preparation mattered most. Our afternoons often revolved around schoolwork, small household tasks, or errands that kept the household running smoothly. I taught him to plan, to organize, to think ahead. Sometimes it was gentle guidance, a quiet suggestion about how to schedule homework or manage responsibilities. Other times it was a firm reminder that his actions had consequences, and that while spontaneity could be fun, it could also create problems if not balanced with forethought. In the evenings, after the day's activities were done, we had what I began to think of as our reflection time. A quiet cup of tea perhaps, or sitting together at the kitchen table, discussing what had gone well, what could have gone better, and how the next day could be improved. I never lectured. I didn't need to. Instead, I asked questions that encouraged him to reflect, to think critically about his choices, and to understand the impact of his actions on others. Family dynamics played a subtle but important role in shaping our lives. My son had grown up in a household where respect, consideration, and empathy were emphasized quietly, not shouted or forced. I had always tried to model these values through my actions, preparing meals thoughtfully, listening carefully, helping without complaint, and showing patience in even the smallest matters. He absorbed these lessons, sometimes without realizing it, shaping his own sense of responsibility and care for others. Financially, we lived modestly. I had worked part-time jobs for years to supplement our income, always careful to manage expenses and save when possible. I wanted him to understand the value of money, not through lectures, but through observation and participation. He helped with small budgeting tasks, learned the rhythm of paying bills, and slowly developed an awareness of the balance between wants and needs. The household chores, too, were shared quietly. My son was learning not just to complete tasks, but to anticipate them, to take pride in small accomplishments, and to see the effects of diligence and care. Laundry folded neatly, floors swept, dishes cleaned. These were not dramatic moments, but they built a foundation of discipline and mindfulness that would extend to larger responsibilities in life. Meal preparation, in particular, became a space for subtle teaching. I would invite him to help, showing him how to plan a menu, how to manage timing, and how to improvise when something went wrong. It wasn't about creating gourmet meals. It was about patience, resourcefulness, and understanding that even small tasks required thought and effort. The night of the unexpected guests had been a turning point, but every meal since became an opportunity to reinforce lessons quietly: how to balance planning with flexibility, how to consider the needs of others, and how to transform challenges into solutions. Education was another layer of daily life where I encouraged focus and initiative. Homework, projects, and long-term goals were approached with a combination of guidance and freedom. I provided tools, advice, and support, but he had to take responsibility for his own work. Mistakes were part of the process, and I made sure he knew that failure wasn't shameful, it was a step toward understanding and growth. I encouraged reflection: what went wrong, why, and how to improve next time. Over time, I saw him internalize these lessons, beginning to approach tasks methodically and thoughtfully rather than haphazardly. Even small social interactions became teaching moments. I observed how he treated friends, neighbors, and strangers, gently guiding him toward empathy, respect, and understanding, without ever forcing the lesson. He was learning to navigate relationships, to read social cues, and to balance honesty with consideration, all subtle but crucial skills for life. And through it all, there was the quiet foundation of trust and communication. I never punished him harshly for mistakes. Instead, I used each incident as an opportunity for learning. We developed a rhythm of discussion and reflection, where he could share concerns, ask questions, and process his experiences. Over time, I noticed a subtle but profound change. He was thinking ahead, anticipating consequences, and beginning to consider not just his desires, but the impact of his actions on others. It wasn't always perfect. There were disagreements, moments of impatience, and times when I had to intervene more directly than I wanted. He sometimes resisted advice, frustrated by what he perceived as restrictions or unnecessary caution. But over time, those small tensions gave way to understanding. He began to see the value in preparation, the wisdom in foresight, and the quiet strength that comes from careful thought and deliberate action. Looking back on those weeks and months, I could see the building blocks of a young man learning to navigate the world. He was growing, not just in skill or knowledge, but in character. Patience, empathy, foresight, responsibility, these qualities were being nurtured quietly, in daily routines, shared tasks, and gentle guidance, and all of it, every lesson, every observation. Every carefully structured day was preparation for moments like the night of the unexpected guests. It wasn't just about handling a surprise dinner or improvising a meal. It was about building the emotional intelligence, resilience, and resourcefulness he would need for life. Each day's small choices, each shared moment, each challenge turned into an opportunity to grow, were quietly shaping his future. By the time months had passed, I could see the transformation taking root. He was more thoughtful, more deliberate, and increasingly aware of the consequences of his actions. He still had his impulsive moments, his bursts of enthusiasm, but now they were tempered with reflection, the lessons of daily life, the rhythm of shared responsibility, and the subtle guidance I offered had begun to solidify into habits and values that would carry him far beyond our home. And in those quiet reflections, I realized something profound. True preparation for life doesn't come from lectures or warnings, but from lived experience, thoughtful guidance, and the patient cultivation of skills, habits, and emotional awareness. By embedding these lessons in our daily routines, in ordinary tasks, and even in moments of surprise, I was shaping not just his immediate behavior, but the very way he would approach challenges, opportunities, and responsibilities for years to come. As the months went on, I noticed a subtle shift in my son. The impulsive, carefree energy that had once defined him was still there, but it was tempered by a growing awareness of consequences. He was beginning to anticipate outcomes, weigh options, and approach situations with a thoughtfulness I hadn't seen before. Yet, that same energy sometimes clashed with this newfound sense of responsibility, creating tension in ways that tested both of us. One afternoon, he came home after school with a frustrated expression, slamming his bag onto the kitchen counter. "Mom," he said sharply, "I don't understand why I have to think about every little thing. Why can't I just act?" I looked at him calmly, hiding my own concern. "Because, dear, every action has an impact," I said softly. "It's not about restricting you. It's about making sure your choices don't create unnecessary problems for you or others." He groaned and sank into a chair. I feel like everyone is always watching, judging, telling me what to do. I can't breathe sometimes." I reached over, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I'm not watching to control you," I said. "I'm here so you can see the bigger picture before things go wrong." It's guidance, not judgment. But even as I said it, I realized that my guidance sometimes felt like pressure to him, even when I tried to make it gentle. He was growing into someone capable, but the process of learning responsibility was heavy, and he hadn't yet learned how to carry it gracefully. I could see the internal struggle in his eyes, a mix of gratitude, frustration, and the yearning for freedom. Later that week, a situation arose that highlighted this tension. He had been invited to a small gathering with friends, an event that required planning and coordination. He wanted to take charge, to organize everything his way, but he was unpracticed in managing details. I offered advice quietly, reminders about timing, preparation, and communication. He accepted it at first, but quickly grew impatient. "Mom, I can handle it," he snapped, a flash of defensiveness in his voice. "I don't need a lecture." I stayed calm, taking a deep breath. "I'm not lecturing," I said softly. "I just want to help you avoid unnecessary stress. You have the skills. You just need to organize them carefully." The night of the gathering arrived, and unsurprisingly, there were moments of chaos, timing misalignments, small miscommunications, minor frustrations among the guests. I watched from a quiet corner, letting him take the lead while offering subtle support. By the end of the evening, he had managed to navigate the challenges, but not without tension and self-doubt. As he cleaned up later, he turned to me, sighing deeply. "Mom, maybe you were right. I didn't see everything I needed to." I smiled softly, feeling the familiar mix of pride and relief. "It's not about being right," I said gently. "It's about learning. Every challenge teaches you something, and every small mistake helps you grow." But growth, I realized, came with its own pressure. As he gained competence, his confidence sometimes led him to take risks he wasn't fully prepared for. I had to balance allowing him independence with stepping in when consequences became too serious. It was a delicate dance. One wrong move could undermine the lessons he was learning, but overprotection would stunt his growth. One evening, a conflict arose that tested this balance. He had invited a group of friends to work on a small project in the living room, without fully planning for space, materials, or coordination. The result was a mess: papers scattered, materials misplaced, and frustration rising among his peers. When he came to me, exasperated, seeking help to resolve it, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to step in immediately, to fix everything, but I knew he needed to take responsibility. "Mom, can you help me clean this up?" he asked, a note of desperation in his voice. I nodded slowly, but instead of taking control, I guided him through the process. "Let's figure out a system," I suggested. "You tell me what needs to go where, and we'll do it together." He groaned but followed, and gradually, the chaos was sorted. Papers were stacked, materials organized, and space restored. As we finished, he looked at me, a mixture of relief and embarrassment on his face. "I guess I didn't think this through," he admitted. "That's okay," I said. "You're learning, and learning isn't always easy. Sometimes it's messy, sometimes stressful, but it's how you grow." These moments of pressure, of small crises, became increasingly frequent as he took on more responsibility. Each time, I had to carefully decide how much to intervene and how much to let him navigate independently. I watched as he wrestled with internal conflict, the desire to succeed, the fear of failure, and the tension between independence and guidance. Over time, I noticed that he was beginning to internalize these lessons. He started planning ahead, thinking through steps before acting, and considering the needs and expectations of others. But the process was slow, sometimes frustrating, and occasionally, he would revert to impulsive behavior. That reminded me how far he still had to go. One night, after a particularly challenging day at school and home, he came to me, eyes heavy with fatigue. "Mom, why is everything so complicated? I feel like I can't get anything right." I pulled him close, holding him quietly. "Life is complicated," I whispered, "but each challenge teaches you something. The hard part isn't failing, it's learning to rise after a setback. You're stronger than you think, and every struggle is shaping you into someone capable of handling even bigger challenges." He nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. But I could see the ongoing tension, the push and pull between independence and guidance, confidence and self-doubt. It was a pressure that weighed on him, but also a pressure that would ultimately shape him. I realized that this phase, the rising tension, the emotional pressure, the constant balancing act, was necessary. It was the crucible in which resilience and maturity were forged. My role was not to remove the pressure, but to guide him through it, to provide a steady presence while allowing him to navigate the challenges himself. Over the following weeks, this pattern continued. Small crises arose, mistakes were made, lessons were learned. He began to anticipate potential problems, to plan more carefully, and to consider the effects of his actions on others. But the internal struggle remained a quiet battle between impulsiveness and responsibility, freedom and foresight. Through it all, I stayed patient, offering guidance only when needed, allowing him to face the consequences of his choices, and reinforcing the understanding that growth often comes through discomfort. I could see him wrestling with this tension internally, processing lessons in real time, and gradually developing the self-control, foresight, and resilience that would become the foundation for his future, even when frustrations surfaced. When his voice rose in impatience, or he questioned my guidance, I held firm. I knew that these struggles, these emotional pressures, were shaping him. They were teaching him the hard truths of responsibility, the quiet power of patience, and the strength that comes from navigating challenges with thoughtfulness rather than impulse. By the end of that season, I could see the transformation taking root. He was more deliberate, more aware, and more capable of handling the complexities of life. The rising tension, the emotional pressure, and the moments of internal struggle had become the crucible in which he was learning resilience, accountability, and confidence. And though the process had been slow and sometimes frustrating, I knew it was preparing him for the turning points and revelations that would define his path ahead. The turning point came quietly, almost imperceptibly, yet it carried the weight of months of effort, tension, and lessons learned. One afternoon, as I was tidying up the kitchen, my son appeared at the doorway holding a small stack of papers, his expression a mix of curiosity and nervousness. "Mom, I found something at school," he said hesitantly, "and I don't really understand it, but I think it matters." I wiped my hands on a towel and took the papers from him, glancing quickly at the contents. At first, it seemed mundane notes, forms, and letters from his teachers, but as I scanned them, a subtle pattern emerged. There were references to achievements, recommendations, and opportunities I hadn't known about. He had been quietly excelling, applying for programs and projects behind my back, and the recognition he was now receiving was tangible. I looked up at him, astonished. "You've been working on all of this without telling me?" I asked softly. He nodded, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "I didn't think it mattered. Or maybe I didn't want to bother you. But some of it's important. I think it could change things for me." We sat at the kitchen table, the papers spread out before us. As I examined each one, I began to see the full picture: scholarship applications, letters of recommendation from teachers impressed by his initiative, invitations to participate in advanced programs, and even early interviews for internships that could provide real-world experience. It was overwhelming, and yet, beneath the surface, there was a story of quiet determination, of a young man stepping into responsibility without fanfare or complaint. My heart swelled with pride, but I also felt a pang of guilt. All this time, I had been guiding him carefully, teaching patience and foresight, preparing him for opportunities I had hoped would come. And here he was, demonstrating the lessons I had tried to instill independently, without my prompting. It was a revelation in the truest sense, the culmination of months of subtle guidance, meeting his own initiative and drive. We went through each document carefully, discussing the implications and options. I pointed out the potential impact of each opportunity, helping him weigh choices, consider timing, and plan next steps. He listened intently, absorbing my guidance, but also expressing his own ideas and preferences. The balance had shifted subtly. He was no longer simply the recipient of advice, he was an active participant in shaping his future. The next few days became a whirlwind of preparation. Applications had to be finalized, interviews scheduled, and plans coordinated. I stepped back, offering support only when needed, and watched as he took ownership. His confidence grew with every task completed, and I noticed the pride in his posture, the steadiness in his voice, and the clarity in his decision-making. And then came the moment of confrontation, though it wasn't with another person, but with the reality of his own potential. During a discussion about a competitive internship, he hesitated, doubting his ability to succeed. "Mom, what if I'm not good enough? What if I fail?" I reached across the table, taking his hand firmly. "You've been preparing for this quietly for months," I said. "You've learned to plan, to adapt, to think critically. Mistakes may happen, but they won't define you. What matters is that you step forward, that you give yourself the chance to grow." His eyes met mine, and for a long moment, Silence stretched between us. Then slowly, a spark of understanding appeared. He realized that the preparation, guidance, and lessons of the past months were not constraints, they were tools, empowering him to face challenges with skill and confidence. The weeks that followed were a blur of action. Interviews, project planning, and scholarship evaluations kept him busy, each success reinforcing his sense of capability. And yet, the true turning point wasn't in external recognition, it was in his internal shift. He no longer approached challenges with fear or hesitation. He analyzed, planned, and acted decisively. The tension and uncertainty that had once dominated our home had given way to quiet mastery, a balance of skill and confidence that had been cultivated over time. One evening, after a long day of meetings and preparations, he sat beside me at the kitchen table, exhausted but glowing. "Mom," he said softly, "I didn't realize all the things you've been teaching me. They actually work. I can handle more than I thought." I smiled, feeling a warmth I could hardly describe. "You've always been capable," I said gently. "I just helped you see it for yourself." And in that moment, I understood the power of quiet guidance. The months of tension, of emotional pressure, of patient teaching had led to this revelation. He had discovered his own strength independently and had begun to wield it with confidence. The shift of power was subtle but profound. He was no longer relying on me for every decision or reassurance. He had internalized the lessons, and they had become part of who he was. Not long after, tangible proof arrived. Acceptance letters, scholarship offers, and invitations to programs he had applied for quietly began to accumulate. Each document, each official recognition, was evidence of his growth, but also a confirmation of the path we had taken together. I didn't need to tell him what he had achieved, he could see it himself. And more importantly, he could see the value of patience, planning, and deliberate action in creating opportunity. That revelation extended beyond academic or professional success. It influenced his relationships, his daily decisions, and his approach to challenges. He became more considerate, more reflective, and increasingly confident in making choices that aligned with his goals. The balance of guidance and independence had shifted fully. He was now the architect of his own life, equipped with the skills and mindset to navigate complexities on his own. And through it all, I realized something profound. The true turning point wasn't in the acceptance letters or scholarship offers, it was in the moment he recognized his own potential. In the quiet understanding that preparation, patience, and self-belief could create real change. The months of tension, subtle control, and guidance had culminated in a revelation that would shape the trajectory of his life far more deeply than any external reward could. Be why the time to last. Official notice arrived, an invitation to a highly competitive mentorship program. I watched him sit quietly, reading the letter, a calm determination settling over him. He looked up at me and smiled, a mixture of gratitude and understanding in his eyes. "Mom, I see it now. I understand why you guided me the way you did. I can take it from here." I felt a quiet pride, a profound sense of satisfaction. The lessons had taken root. The pressure, the challenges, and the guidance had culminated in empowerment. And in that calm, steady moment, I knew the most important transformation had occurred, not in accolades, documents, or recognition, but within him, where resilience, foresight, and confidence had been quietly forged. The weeks that followed were quieter, not because there was nothing happening, but because the tension that had once dominated our home had lifted. My son moved through each day with a sense of purpose I had rarely seen before. Decisions that would have caused him anxiety months ago were now made thoughtfully, confidently, and with consideration for others. The subtle lessons of patience, preparation, and self-belief had taken root, and I could see them reflected in his every action. Our mornings became calm rituals again. Breakfasts were simple, nourishing, and shared with conversation rather than chaos. He would rise early, organize his day, and approach tasks with focus. I noticed small moments of pride in him, the satisfaction that came from seeing a plan executed successfully, or a responsibility handled without prompting. It was a quiet joy, but one that radiated through the house like sunlight filtering through a window. Evenings were spent in reflection, but now the discussions were different. He shared achievements, challenges, and ideas, and together we would explore solutions or next steps. He no longer relied solely on my guidance, but he respected it, listening carefully, considering suggestions, and then acting independently. I watched as his confidence solidified into self-reliance, his impulsiveness tempered by foresight. One afternoon, he came home with a small stack of letters and certificates. He laid them on the table, and we went through them together. Scholarships, mentorship opportunities, and recognition for leadership projects, all tangible proof of his growth. Yet the pride in my chest was quiet, because I understood that the true success wasn't in the papers themselves but in the transformation behind them. He looked at me and smiled softly. "Mom, I think I finally understand. It's not about being perfect. It's about learning, adjusting, and trying again. And I couldn't have figured that out without you." I reached across the table, holding his hand. "You had it in you all along," I said. "I just helped you see it for yourself." There were still challenges, of course. Deadlines, new projects, and unexpected obstacles arose regularly. But he handled them differently now. He approached problems analytically, sought advice only when necessary, and faced setbacks with resilience instead of panic. His sense of responsibility extended beyond his own tasks. He considered the impact of his actions on others, managed relationships thoughtfully, and began mentoring younger students quietly, passing along lessons he had learned firsthand. The small household tasks, the shared chores, even the meals we prepared together, took on new meaning. They were no longer merely routines. They became exercises in teamwork, foresight, and mutual respect. He would take the lead in preparing a meal, organizing ingredients, and ensuring that everything ran smoothly. But he did so with a calm confidence that had been cultivated over months of learning, mistakes, and gentle guidance. I realized, in those moments, that the unexpected guests months ago had been more than a disruption, they had been a catalyst. That night had forced him to confront his impulsiveness, to adapt quickly, and to collaborate in a setting where he had little experience. The lessons I had woven into our daily life had prepared him to transform chaos into opportunity, and in doing so, he had discovered strengths he hadn't known he possessed. Even our extended family began to notice the change. Friends and relatives commented on his maturity, his thoughtful approach to problem solving, and the quiet leadership he demonstrated. And while these external recognitions were gratifying, I understood that the true reward was the internal growth, the resilience, foresight, and self-assurance that now guided his choices. One evening, as we sat together after dinner, he looked at me with a seriousness that made me pause. "Mom," he said quietly, "I want you to know something. I don't take what you've done for me for granted. The lessons, the guidance, the patience, it's shaped who I am. I feel ready for anything now." I felt a swell of emotion, a quiet mix of pride and relief. "You've earned this," I said softly. "All of it. The growth, the confidence, it's yours because you chose to take it." There were no dramatic celebrations, no grand gestures. The transformation was steady, subtle, and deeply rooted. He didn't boast of his successes, but acted with quiet confidence, handling responsibilities with care, thoughtfulness, and resilience. The lessons had been earned, not given, and that made them all the more enduring. Looking back, I realized that the choice I had made, the decision not to react impulsively, to guide rather than control, had shaped far more than a single evening. It had created a foundation for a lifetime of thoughtful decision-making, independence, and strength. The improvisation during that chaotic dinner, the patience in daily routines, and the subtle lessons of foresight had all culminated in a young man capable of facing challenges with courage, resourcefulness, and dignity. And as I watched him move forward, planning his studies, projects, and personal goals, I understood the true measure of success. It wasn't the meals prepared, the awards received, or the opportunities offered. It was the transformation, quiet and steady, into someone who could stand on his own, navigate life thoughtfully, and carry the lessons of patience, resilience, and adaptability into everything he did. The jewelry I had once considered selling remained untouched, a small symbol of a larger truth. Sometimes, the most important choices are not about immediate gain, but about nurturing growth, preserving opportunity, and trusting that the lessons we guide others through will shape their future in ways we can only begin to imagine. And in that calm, reflective understanding, I found a quiet, enduring joy. My son had not only learned to navigate the world, he had learned to carry himself with dignity, confidence, and foresight. And that, more than any material gift, more than any immediate solution, was the greatest reward of all.